there is a liking gap of 12%, where on a scale from 1 to 100, you think that I like you, say a 70, but I actually like you 82.
Hey everybody, the podcast is back with a new name called Builders. So, some context. During the first 42 episodes, I realized the original title, The High EQ Marketer, didn't really encompass all the conversations I was having, the people that we were talking to, and that the focus was really on people that had experience building businesses, teams, and careers. So hence the name change. And also, exciting news, the podcast is now part of business.com. So shout out to them for making this part of their podcast and content network. And we're going to shoot for a new episode every Tuesday. So speaking of episodes, today is a conversation I had a few months ago with Zoe Chance. She's an award-winning professor and author. She's a professor at the Yale School of Management. Her book is about influence. You're going to really dig, I think, her advice on how to advance in your career and how to influence people. And then we have a new segment with editor-in-chief Marty Beckerman, where we hit on a few interesting stories he's covering. And this week, one of my favorites is where the happiest workers in America live. So thanks a lot for tuning in and enjoy. All right, we have a new segment. As I said at the top of the show, we've rebranded this podcast as Builders, where we interview people building businesses, teams, and careers. And it occurred to me, I happen to know the mastermind behind a twice weekly newsletter covering the same subject. So each week I'm going to sit down with editor-in-chief of the B newsletter, Marty Beckerman. Marty, how you doing?
I'm doing great, John. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for agreeing to do this. So you have a reputation, as I think you know, for being the master of the pun, the master of the dad joke. What do you think? Is this reputation warranted? Do you consider it a compliment or an insult? And what's the over-under of the number of puns you'll be dropping in our conversations each week?
Yeah, I'm definitely the most annoying guy in the office. But I actually became a dad this year. So now my dad jokes are actual dad jokes. Before they were just, I don't know what you'd call them. Wannabe dad joke. But, yeah, no, I have a baby girl now who in a couple of years will think I'm the most hilarious person in the world. And, by 5, she'll probably be like, Dad, shut up. You're super obnoxious.
Well, you've had a crazy, amazing year, not only having your first child, you launched the newsletter that we're going to talk about, and then also released your 7th novel. Amazing. Can you ever top this year?
2 of them are good. This is one of the 2 good ones. So. Okay.
What do you mean by that?
Oh, you know, some of them are better than others, but.
So the novel, let's actually get into that. It's a time travel mystery. Is that where you're going with the genre?
I wouldn't say it's maybe a satire. So it's
okay.
It's called The Time Meowsheen. It's about in a future where climate change has ruined the world and the glaciers have all melted and humanity is dying out and it's the worst case scenario for climate change, climate apocalypse. A brilliant scientist,
uplifting book so far.
A brilliant scientist realizes they have to go back to 2000 and elect Al Gore as president because that will correct the timeline. But then her cat jumps into the portal as cats tend to do, jumping through things. And now the cat must elect Al Gore president. Okay. Which sounds insane, but New York Magazine did call it one of the funniest books of 2023. So somebody liked it.
Well, congratulations on that. You know, I was, cats jump in a lot of things. I actually was sucked into an Instagram reel yesterday, which just was a compilation of cats jumping on aluminum foil. Have you seen this?
No.
All right. This is something to watch with your newborn daughter later today.
And our cat.
Yeah. And your cat. Well, congrats on all of that stuff. So as far as the newsletter is concerned, it launched when? It launched last year. And what's the mission?
Yeah, it's been around for about a year and a half now. We launched the newsletter because during the pandemic, a lot of people who were out of work, stuck at home during lockdown, decided to pursue their passions. They might have been thinking of launching a business for a very long time, or it was a bit of an impulse. Generation Z has a ton of entrepreneurial energy, and they started creating businesses, side hustles from their couch, all kinds of endeavors. And we wanted to create a newsletter that would give guidance, that would provide information on how to do this, while also interviewing experts, and just being really entertaining and really fun. And we've seen phenomenal growth, and we're having a blast doing it.
Nice. Well, it is really great. And each week I want to talk to you about some of the stories you're working on that I find really interesting. One of them is, like, if there's a thought exercise everyone could have, that if you could move to any city or any state in the United States, like, where would you be happiest? There's a company that recently did a survey to try to determine where the happiest workers live. And were you surprised by the answer?
I was shocked by the answer, which coming in at number one was Alaska, the last frontier, which is where I am from. And while I enjoyed my childhood, it's dark for 9 months of the year. I don't normally associate Alaska with anything happy. Cold and dark. But Alaskan workers say that they're the happiest because of high wages. There's a high cost of living there, but the wages match it, and very short commute times, which when you're mushing dog sleds through the frozen tundra, there's not too much traffic. So compared to LA, which we move about an inch at a time. So
yeah, it's kind of amazing that that is really shocking. There's something about northern climates, because I guess, like, Norway's the happiest country in the world, and all that stuff. I don't know what's going on. It also strikes me.
There was an urban legend for years. It turns out this is not probably true, which is sad.
Okay.
But there was an urban legend for years that Alaskans ate more ice cream per capita than anybody in the U.S. So,
well, there's also a study that says that Seattleites, where I'm from, like, buy the most sunglasses, which also just doesn't seem like it could be true. But I also think, speaking of Seattle in this study, we complain a lot in Seattle about life being difficult for the 3 or 4 months where it's really, really dark and really, really wet. And so I guess Alaskans are also just tougher in addition to being happier. In what state was where?
I'm not tough. That's why I left. I don't live. I can't do one more of those winters.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm in LA because I need sunny and 70 every day. But I'm weak.
Okay, a little behind the scenes here. Like, our editor was like, oh, there's too much light behind your shoulder, Marty. Marty has the blinds shut, but there's still, like, sun streaming through. So that's how difficult.
I'm just soaking up all the vitamin D I did not get the first 18 years of my life. So
that's how difficult it is in LA. But so anyway, in which state were workers the least happy?
Well, John, things are not peachy in the state of Georgia.
There we go.
Where workers are the least satisfied. The survey didn't really get into why that is, but I guess people in Atlanta might want to head north with their snowshoes and live the good life.
Yeah. Well, you can definitely say that commute times are kind of brutal in Atlanta. I also wonder if there's something about the fact, now that I'm piecing it together, like in Atlanta, you can be outside all the time. So maybe when you're working in Georgia, you can see what you can do outside of work. But in Alaska, there's really nothing you can do outside of work. So why not embrace that and be happy? I don't know, just a theory. But another survey you're covering or a story you're covering is an annual report from the Federal Reserve, which asks people how much they would need to be paid in order to take a job. And so what was the big news coming out of that this month?
Sure. So this figure is called the reservation wage. The Federal Reserve does this survey every year, and it's the number, as you said, the lowest amount on average people say they would either switch their job or take a new job. And it is much higher this year. It's an 8% jump year over year. For people without a college degree, it's $80,000. For people with a college degree, on average, $100,000 is the lowest amount they would switch jobs for. So again, huge jump year over year. Surely it has to do with inflation. The cost of housing has skyrocketed. Groceries, every time you go to the grocery store, eggs are twice as much. And workers feel that they're not making ends meet. The good news for them is that companies actually are meeting these demands because of the tight labor market. According to the Fed, companies are paying 14% more in wages this year versus last year. So it actually is keeping up with the post-inflation wage demands.
Wow, that's big. And probably bigger companies, big profitable companies, your Amazons, et cetera, can foot the bill. What about for businesses that have tighter margins or are smaller and can't pay someone $100K out of the gate? What should businesses do if they're looking to attract talent? Sure.
That's, as you mentioned, for Facebook, that's a salary that's to be expected. But for a small proprietorship, sole proprietorship, family-owned business, that's an enormous starting salary for people. We spoke to an HR expert who recommended a few different paths. Some are not ideal, such as taking on more work yourself as the business owner or paying yourself less. But she did recommend that business owners can offer more benefits, whether that's more vacation days, free doggy daycare, things to attract workers, perhaps in lieu of a higher salary to make it a really attractive offer. And that's a way to find and retain talent.
Nice. That makes sense. And the last thing I want to ask you about, you snagged some pretty great interviews in the newsletter. The one that's coming out, I think, next week or the week after, is your team interviewed the president of the Rockefeller Foundation about his new book, Big Bets, and how to actually make societal change happen and have measurable results. What was most interesting to you about that conversation?
Right. I was saying before that I kind of wanted to headline the article. I like big bets and I cannot lie, but it's a really serious interview, so that would have been not good. So Dr. Raj Shah is president of the Rockefeller Foundation. He's the former director of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and he also was head of USAID under President Obama. So he has accomplished some really impressive things in his career, from overseeing the U.S. response to the Haiti earthquake to the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. He's helped get vaccines throughout the developing world. So he's had a hugely impressive career, and his new book is about how to turn your ideal goals that might seem kind of pie in the sky, how to turn them into measurable, tangible results through a lot of nuanced and complex strategy.
Nice. All right. To round this out, I guess two questions. One is, how does somebody get the free newsletter if they want it?
Sure. Go to business.com. You'll see the sign up form and enter your email, and you'll receive 2 issues per week, one on Tuesday and one on Friday. The Friday one has our popular webcomic, which I call Dilbert for Generation Z. It's actually called Work-Life Unbalance. But now that the Dilbert guy is, kind of lost his mind, we sensed a business opening ourselves there.
Nice. You got to take advantage of what you can. And then just so that we don't disappoint the audience here, what maybe you can tell the dad joke you told me last week. You remember that one?
Oh, sure. What did the doctor say after the Onion got a concussion playing in the NFL?
What was that?
He'll live, but he'll be a vegetable forever.
Jeez.
I stole that joke from Christopher Hitchens. So that was.
Okay. That's okay. You're
He
not a
has a
professional.
20-minute. He has a 20-minute version of that joke. I
Okay.
heard it over drinks at some journalist event in 2005. It takes 20 minutes to lead up to that stupid pun, and everyone groans, and it was great. But we'd have to do another podcast episode to include the full version.
All right. If anybody has any dad jokes they want us to read on the air, just leave a comment on this podcast. We'll review and do our best to do that. Thanks, Marty.
Thanks, John.
Hi, Zoe. How are you? Great to see you.
I'm fantastic. It's great to see you again, John.
I'm really excited to talk about the topic of influence. It's for sure one of the most important things that any of us have. Your book literally talks about that. Influence is your superpower. And what I like about it is we're trying to achieve, maybe an emotional gain or some type of gain, but there's a science in making good things happen. And that's what I'm hoping to talk about today. When you and I met, actually our first interaction in a funny way is you asked me for $20. Do you remember that?
Yeah,
Of cold hard cash.
that's
And
true.
you did that for an experiment. Maybe can you talk about that and the actual experiment you did for the audience?
Yeah, so this is an experiment that I do sometimes in class and when I teach workshops to illustrate some weird things about asking. And the experiment was the next ask. So my first ask of you maybe was a test to see if you're actually my friend, and it turned out you were. But the ask invitation in the workshop is I have $20 in cash, and I say to a participant or to the room, would you persuade me to give you $20? Having taught absolutely nothing about influence. And, it's kind of funny and it's awkward. And of course, these are for people like executives. Like, you don't need $20. You don't need my $20. So it's further a little bit uncomfortable. But what happens the vast majority of the time is that the person who is asking is not actually asking. There's some story based on some assumptions about what the money could be used for. So we had somebody talking about his triplets and they need a lot of diapers. And then it just leaves the conversation there, just waiting for me to say, okay, but I don't, because I'm waiting until there's an actual ask and until that person actually tries to close the deal. Most people think they've asked when they haven't. And this is illustrating this principle that a lot of us go around the world thinking that other people know what we would like and that we just have to be deserving to have all of these good things happen when clearly we don't. It's not true for any of us. And it's also unequally true for some of us more than others. So, at a basic level, a lot of the influence that I teach is self advocacy. But of course, for leaders, this extends to advocating for your team and teaching the people you mentor to advocate for themselves and for better policies.
Yeah, when I think about the salespeople that I know who are most successful, people who are in a sales function or sales role, they're excellent at making the big ask. Yes,
Right?
may I have $1 million? Um, this costs $10 million, where others may have a trepidation about asking for the ask, or they want the client or prospect to basically do that part for them,
Right.
and it's not going to happen. Yeah, that's really interesting. I want to get back to that, but there's something else that you segued into when you were speaking at our summit, and that was there's an exercise that you do with your class sometimes where folks have it. I can't remember whether they have an item or they have a certain amount of money and they're trying to trade up. Can you describe what happened and then kind of the end result for one of your most successful situations?
Yeah, this piece is crazy. And it's a fun, like ice breaking team building thing if you have an orientation at your company or something. Some other people have done this. The game is called Bigger and Better, and you start with something small. So it could be something like a nickel, or it could be like we'll use in class a paperclip. And you trade up with something for something bigger and better, as many times as you want, with anyone on earth who will trade with you. You decide what bigger and better is. So it might be size. Like we've had in class, someone show up with a 10-foot statue of the Egyptian god Anubis and then not know what to do with it. But it could be sentimental value, like some people have ended up with love poems. And it could be so big that you couldn't even bring it into the classroom. And the story that I shared was of a couple students, Manus and Tom, who had traded up between a Monday and a Thursday with 10 business owners in our town of New Haven, Connecticut. And they traded up for, there was some cupcakes, there was a cheese gift certificate, there was an ugly painting in there that was apparently valuable. But their biggest, best thing, they said, please come bring the class outside. It's in front of the building. And we went downstairs and there was a Volkswagen Jetta and it said bigger and better across the windshield. And they donated this family to the car to a refugee family from Afghanistan. The mom, who had been commuting 2 hours each way on the bus, got to spend more time with her family and her kids. And I love this story because it illustrates, first of all, the vast opportunities that are out there if we even thought of asking, and how we don't have to always be able to repay whatever favor or help it is that somebody else is offering us, and how when we can share a grand or fun or engaging vision, people can be really excited to step up, even more than if we asked them to do something that was more easy and manageable. So I love that story. And I also love how it illustrates some research findings, like that people are 2 or 3 times more likely to say yes than we think that they will be when we make predictions. And another one I really like is that there is a liking gap of 12%, where on average, people like you 12% more than you realize. And this is part of the reason that they're more likely to say yes than you think.
So, okay, so to reiterate, paperclip to car in 10 trades in 4
4
days.
days.
Yeah.
And the number of car dealerships they called was 1.
Oh, wow. Okay, so the car dealership was the last one.
The last one,
Oh,
yep.
okay. Okay, cool. I wonder, uh, y- like you're working with younger students, younger than me anyway. Anyway, do you notice anything with your latest cohorts of students where where either they're struggling with self advocacy or influence compared to someone like me, they're elder, and then also where new cohorts have advantages? I'm thinking about like whether it's social media or being more connected is a challenge or maybe a benefit. Any reaction to that?
So first of all, for those of you who have not met John, he looks like he's in his 20s. So when he says elder, I don't know exactly what he means.
Thank you.
Cohort wise, first of all, the students at Yale who I teach are MBA students, only a few undergrads here and there. So they're in their late 20s. They're, I guess, at this point, millennials. I think pretty much all of them, with a few Gen Zs sprinkled in. The discomfort around self-advocacy, I would say, is definitely not getting better overall. However, there are, as I've observed, and many colleagues and managers who I've talked to in other organizations, there have been an increasing number of people who are asking in a really obnoxious way that sounds entitled. And
Mm,
it's not that nobody used to do that, but there's some more of that going on than there used to be. I don't know if that
mm,
relates to social media, but then there is an increasing discomfort with using the telephone for sure. One of the exercises that we do with my class is we do a cold calling challenge where they're fundraising for charity. And I had been surprised to realize how many people never even make phone calls anymore. So the idea of cold calling and asking a stranger for money is already really, really scary, even if
mm.
you're comfortable calling people. But just the idea of actually talking to a stranger on the phone is becoming, for a lot of people, less comfortable. What I also notice is that there's a more mm, top of mind kind of interest in cultural differences. And it's
Mm.
not just that I have a very global, international population of students and executives I teach, but people are more interested in understanding that and talking about it. And same thing for individual personality differences. So there are big cultural differences in how direct or indirect people expect us to be. And there are also big differences in terms of privilege, big differences in terms of gender and things like this. And personality type and behavior about being introverted or extroverted.
My son is 15 years old, so I'm not in my 20s. But the reason I bring that up is he's just joined a team that's going to play a sport in the fall, and they're all doing personality tests to understand each other and how to communicate better. And I never did anything even remotely close to that in my sporting days as a youth. And I think there's this recognition, bigger recognition that understanding different perspectives is a super important part to achieving anything together. So it's great to see that you're noticing that more. Um,
Is he excited about that? Is he finding it helpful and valuable?
he hasn't done it yet, so I think it's
Okay.
I can't remember whether it's the disc profile, or I can't remember which one he's doing. But both my kids are teenagers in school and really focused on this issue, understanding different perspectives. So that's great to see that you're seeing that as well. Now I want to ask more about the liking gap. So I think, how do I express this? So Zoe, I meet you and I might say, there's a 60% chance that Zoe likes me, but in reality there's a 70% chance that you like me. Is that what you mean by the liking gap?
The liking gap is it that um, on a scale from 1 to 100, you think that I like you, say a 70, but I actually like you 82.
Okay.
It's also true that most people like most of the people that they meet.
Why
But
why is
that's a
that?
different statistic, and I don't know that number. What?
What's the science behind that, if there is it? I mean, it's just good. That's just an inherent good fact. But is there anything? And I wonder, actually, a related question is getting back together in person in a lot of cases.
Hmm.
Does that make the does that make us like each other even more?
Yes, for sure. So, two specific researchers who've looked a lot into these topics and done many experiments are Erica Boothby, who's done a lot of the experiments on the liking gap, and then also Juliana Schroeder, and she's worked some with Nicholas Epley. And she has strangers come together and talk to each other, and you're predicting, do you so are you going to enjoy this conversation? Are you going to be glad that you had it? And are you going to have enjoyed your time more? Like, she'll ask people, say, before a commute, talk to a stranger on the subway. And then after your subway ride, fill out this survey and tell us how it went. And before getting on the subway, we definitely don't want to talk to a stranger. Or, you show up to some in person event where you didn't know anybody and it's super, super awkward. But you don't understand that actually everybody else is kind of feeling awkward and they're so happy to have a stranger come up and talk to them. And this is almost every single person ends up being happy that they talked to a stranger. This is, I think, reported in Malcolm Gladwell's book, Talking to Strangers, also.
Mm.
So almost everyone is glad that they talked to a stranger, especially if you're the person coming up and helping them feel more comfortable. It's just that we don't predict it. But John, I've also had a number of people ask me recently about if it's really true that people have lost some of their EQ and their social skills during the pandemic. And I don't know about research on that, just that anecdotally, a lot of people think so. Do you know about that?
I don't know. I don't have any. I can't give you any data point or science. I'd say anecdotally, when I saw people in 3D for the first time, people that I had hired or people that I had met via Zoom through work, it was they're kind of like sparks, sparks that happen.
In a good way, you're saying.
Yeah, in a really good way. Um, it is also a very strange feeling because in a bunch of cases, I was like, wait, actually, have I met you in person before? There was something very weird about the whole thing.
That
Um,
makes me feel so much better, by the way. 'Cause I keep having that recently.
yeah. So let me ask also about the liking stats. So repeat that again. So someone is 2 to 3%, two to three times more likely to say yes than you think they are.
Yeah, if you're estimating how likely do I think they are to say yes to an in-person request. So this comes back to what you were bringing up about the environment that we're in. And people are most likely to say yes to face-to-face requests
Mhm.
relative to any other type of face-to-face, one-to-one, you ask me. And I am more likely to say yes to in that situation than if you pick up the phone or send an email or you have texted me or you just posted a random, not random, but you posted a public message on social media or you emailed a group. In those more arm's length, one to many kind of invitations, there's nobody who has to say no. So it's very easy for nobody to say yes. But if you're asking me in person, in addition to the fact that I like you more than you realize, I'm also feeling how uncomfortable it would be to say no and actually reject you. And this is even when we're talking with somebody, say you brought up sales, even if there's an annoying salesperson, we feel bad. Most of us feel bad saying no or rejecting that person or stopping them. And the more time a salesperson spends trying to persuade you to buy that product or service, the more pressure you will feel to buy that thing because you feel reciprocity for the time that they spent and you just can't help it. So, one to one requests in person, higher likelihood than we think. One to many requests or indirect, less likely than we think to say yes. And it's I don't want to call it a sweet spot because it's not that you should always be asking in this way, but if you want to make sure that you're not pressuring the other person, email is a great way to do it. So, a single email to a single person and following up if you don't hear back from them rather than being on the phone or face to face or on Zoom or, conference calls where that person feels like they've been put on the spot. I really want people to say yes, typically only if they really want to say yes, because there are too many situations where you can influence someone to say yes in that moment. But then if they regret that decision, it's just a world of pain and frustration and time wasted for you in the future.
Well, when you were concluding your talk, the one that I was referring to earlier, you the thing that resonated most for me were the four words, what would it take? Meaning the way that I took it is when you're asking for something, maybe you're not putting someone on the spot and you're saying yes or no, I need to know right now. It's here's an objective or here's an outcome. What would it take for you to say yes to that outcome? Is that maybe could you pontificate on that for a moment?
Sure. Those four words, what would it take? I call them magic question because it's so powerful. And this is my favorite influence technique because when I teach a whole bunch of different science and strategies, it's the one that the most people love to walk away with and practice immediately. You can use this in almost any situation as long as you have a teeny bit of rapport. You can use it again with the same person. You can use it with the person who you've taught the magic question to, with your team, with your kids, and they're like, oh, the magic question. Okay. But it's a respectful question to be asking. What would it take? And typically it's what would it take for this to happen? What would it take for you to say yes is a little higher pressure? So sometimes you might do that, but what would it take for this to happen? And then it shifts the tone of the conversation from a situation where they might feel defensive to collaborative problem solving. And it also shows that you are not only respecting them and their freedom of choice, but you are willing to be influenced yourself. And you are so often getting a roadmap with some ingredients on this path to success that you just couldn't have anticipated. So, like in a medical device company where I worked in marketing, the chief people person had to go ask the employees to work overtime in production during the 6 weeks at the end of the year that included Thanksgiving and Christmas,
Uh,
3 shifts a day. And of course, she's going to give them incentives because you can't just force people to come in. But she wanted to respect them and have them feel engaged and willing to do this. So her question was, what would it take for you to feel good about coming in and working during extra hours during this period at the end of the year when, of course, I will pay you extra money? And they told her, first of all, we take the bus and it doesn't run at night, so we need cab fare. And she just didn't know that because she's an executive. They said, we're hungry and we like pizza. Okay, great. Good to know. And they said, and actually, we're really stressed about wrapping our Christmas presents. So if you could hire somebody to wrap Christmas presents, that would be fantastic. So she does all of these things that are very simple, but she just wouldn't have known that that's what they want. And it's not just that production hits record levels and everyone gets a 30% bonus, but engagement continues to be high the next year after this period is over because they feel respected and appreciated. She follows through with what they said it would take, and they feel engaged because that's what she was asking. What would it take for you to feel good? And so they do. This is a really great question for leadership. It's a great question for problem solving. It is a great question for sales and marketing. And some people want to know, well, what if they say no, nothing, that it's impossible? And sometimes that happens. And of course, you are better off knowing than not knowing, but it happens much less often than people would predict.
you, yeah, I think about things that companies are asking employees to do now. Maybe it's returning to the office, and that seems like what the chief people person did in this case was focused in on the right higher level question.
Yeah.
It could have been, how much money do you need in order to do this?
Right.
What would it take? But but this person asked, like, what would it take for you to be pumped about it? And the solutions weren't more money. It would probably, in some ways, might have been less than this person was expecting. So it would take, yeah, it's really, really, really cool. And that's right. Because I think by and large, people like being in the office, but there are downsides to it, whether it's a commute or whether there's something at home or whatever the issue is. But framing it in terms of what would it be to feel good, that's really, really a higher level question. Um, I know one of the things that you focus on is like what holds us back from self advocacy, and how some groups, you focused on gender in our talk, um, don't advocate themselves as much as they should. Can you talk a little bit about the science behind that and what you've learned and what you recommend?
Sure. I think the most illuminating study in this area is a study by a sociologist who was working with school kids and teachers and parents, because this one is so relevant to everyone who wants to be a good, kind, supportive, high EQ marketer or leader of any kind. And what this sociologist Jessica Calarco found was when she measured and tracked which kids were asking in these different classrooms, they were asking for things like flexibility or extra time or extra help or leniency to get out of a punishment. And then she tracked which kids did teachers say yes to. There was a big asking gap where kids from middle class families were asking 7 times as often as kids from working class families. I don't think anyone would be surprised about the direction, but pretty much all of us would be surprised about the magnitude. So she then looks at her data on who the teachers said yes to, and the teachers, like all of us who want to be supportive managers, tried to say yes to all the kids if they could. So the teachers were not biased. Then she interviews the parents and she asks what the parents are teaching their kids about asking and self advocacy. And the working class parents say that they are teaching their kids to work hard and be self reliant. Don't expect handouts, and you might have to work 2 or 3 times as hard as some other kid. That's how your life is going to be, and you've got to learn how to handle this. And so this is all good intentions. And that part really touches me because I grew up with a single mom and we were poor and definitely being taught self advocacy. Then she interviews the middle class parents. And even though most people in general, definitely including middle class people, don't do as much asking as they could, what they understood from their experience was that privilege is at least in part negotiated. So they were teaching their kids to negotiate these different kinds of privileges, flexibility, help, and all these desirable outcomes. So this is a situation where there's no bad intention and there are no biased people, but there are drastically biased outcomes because of the way we approach with our best intentions these situations, the parents, the teachers, the kids, everybody's trying to do the right thing. So I share this study because as a manager and a leader, even if we're just managing or leading a small team, or honestly, even if we're just a parent of multiple children, when somebody's asking us for something, we can do a huge service to our group if we ask ourselves who could have asked, but they didn't. Maybe because they didn't think of it, or maybe they didn't think they were allowed to. Who could have asked? And then to also ask ourselves, is there some kind of policy that should be changed here? And these two questions are simple. They're not at all easy, but these are really, really important.
Is there evidence of or studies that have looked at policies and who enacts them? It could be in the workplace, it could be in school, to try to remedy the outcome.
When you say who enacts them, well, actually, something interesting that I've noticed, this is not from research, but many of my colleagues have brought it up, people teaching various subjects, different schools. What we've noticed is that a lot of the people who are bringing issues of unfairness to our attention are not the people in the group that's potentially being treated unfairly. So when you said that your son and his friends are interested in talking about differences and outcomes and disparities, what my colleagues and I have noticed a lot is that it's very often somebody who is in a dominant group, like say it's a white kid or it's an American kid or it's a man who's coming to complain about a gender issue affecting women. We're seeing a whole lot of allies. And this is something that's really a sea change from how it was when I started teaching 10 years ago. So, coming back to your previous question, this is, at least in my perception, a very big evolution in the new cohort of people who are coming into the workplace. And I think it bodes very well.
That's great. More than great. It's fantastic. Conscious allyship and proactive. That's really great. In terms of what I mean, I'm sure that there's the answer to this question is a lot, but what's something big that has not yet been discovered about the science of influence that you're particularly interested in, or maybe you think that we can understand better in 5, 10, 15 years?
Hmm. There is a huge gap between what practitioners understand and at least feel that they understand and what academics understand or feel that they understand about personal differences and how this relates to influence. So many practitioners are really excited about putting people into boxes and saying, you're this
What's a
kind of
practice?
person, so I'll approach you this way.
Sorry to jump
Like,
in. What's a practitioner in this case?
oh, somebody, let's say somebody who's working in marketing or sales, somebody who's in industry actually doing a real world job
Okay.
versus like
Okay.
ivory tower kind of making up things
Okay.
about the world.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
so, so in the real world, people whose job and livelihood and ability to support their family depends on their being persuasive, and they will say things like it's so like the disc profile is
Mhm.
super helpful in identifying who's what type and how I influence them. Or there's a lot of fandom in sales for categorizing people as visual or auditory or kinesthetic type communicators. On the academic side, there is very little research supporting any of this. And the some of the research that has existed and found nothing has tested that visual audio kinesthetic idea and said, even though this has transformed learning and education and teachers are teaching in this way, it doesn't actually help to try to identify particular kids in one of those buckets. Or for sales, research says it doesn't help. But I think you and I and everyone trying to be influential in the world understands from our experience and our intuition that we do need to approach different people differently. So the research in academia is very poor, and I hope
Mhm.
that it will become a lot richer so that we can understand better what are the individual differences that will help us approach this person in this way and that person in that way.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. Last question. I'm sure you're asked about a lot about human influence in the world of AI, and when a chatbot or chat GPT can do anything for us, what's kind of going to be the role of human influence going forward? Are we there yet to ask that kind of existential question, or is it silly to ask? What's your reaction to that?
John, I am so excited and scared, and it's absolutely the right time for all of us to be asking, because great things will happen, horrible things will happen. Almost none of us are going to be able to keep and have the same kind of job and do the same kind of work that we are now. Definitely including me. On the positive side, there are already incredibly persuasive and empathetic chatty chatbots that you can talk to. Like Pi AI is one that I tested by having a conversation that I had just had with my therapist.
Oh,
And I have
wow.
a fantastic therapist. And Pi AI was 85% as good as my fantastic therapist.
Wow.
And Pi AI was 800% better than my very empathetic friends at having
Mhm.
this kind of conversation with me, where it's helping me see see myself and the other people in this situation in a more empathetic way, and it's asking questions to have me step back and take a different perspective and learn something about myself in the situation, and it's having me feel seen and feel good. That's probably 85% of therapy, is just that. And I didn't have to be at all concerned with what my therapist thinks of me. And am I
Mhm.
a weirdo or boring or horrible or any of that? But then on the other side, we are so influenced by other people. Influence is such a powerful tool that there is no possibility that there won't be powerful individuals and groups of people unleashing the powers of AI to influence us, not just when we know that we're talking to a chatty chatbot. Anyone behind the scenes can be influencing me who now trusts the chatbot, like my therapist. But say somebody can call me up, like already, right? Chat GPT can call me up with your voice and your words and using the funny slang that you use. And I think that I'm talking to you, and you can ask me for something, and it just doesn't cross my mind that it's not you. I mean, we can have AI raising extremist armies. So the powers of AI persuasion to do good things and terrible things are very close to being bigger than the powers of people to do that on their own.
Zoe, thanks so much for talking with me today. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, John.
Did you know that more than 20 million professionals and business owners visit business.com and Business News Daily? Why? It's the best place for resources, advice, and information about how to grow your business. And if your goal is to reach our audience, you should become one of our lead partners, sponsor a section of the site, or sponsor even this podcast. Reach us at business.com/connect. That's business.com/connect.